Anakin Skywalker felt the weight of the Jedi Council's distrust on his shoulders. He had always sought approval, aiming for the title of Jedi Master, but was rejected. Even though he was the chosen one, the Council was reluctant to grant him more power and influence. This further eroded his trust in the Order, causing him to question the true wisdom of the Jedi. Over time, this rejection planted seeds of resentment in his heart, creating a growing distance between Anakin and those who were supposed to be his mentors and spiritual guides. Among the Masters, Mace Windu was the one who began to notice the subtle changes in Anakin's attitude. His growing closeness to Palpatine, a politician he himself had never fully trusted, raised suspicions. Anakin seemed involved in something much bigger than he admitted, and Windu couldn't ignore it. He began to wonder to what extent Anakin was being manipulated by the Supreme Chancellor. It was clear that the relationship between the two wasn't just political, and that made him uneasy. Looking for a way to better understand the situation, the ever-wise Yoda suggested that Mace Windu take Anakin on a joint mission. It would be an opportunity to spend more time with him, probe him, and perhaps uncover what was really going on. The chosen location was the planet Solist, a volcanic and little-explored world with a series of diplomatic issues and a request for help that required the presence of Jedi. Windu saw this mission as a chance to observe Anakin closely and, perhaps, discover his true feelings and intentions. During the journey, however, something unexpected happened. As they were approaching Solist, the Jedi ship was suddenly attacked. The attack was precise and devastating, destroying all the tracking and communication systems. The ship managed to escape total destruction, but was forced to land in an inhospitable region of the planet, surrounded by rivers of lava and jagged mountains. The environment was dangerous and treacherous, and any call for help would be impossible without communication. After the forced landing, Windu and Anakin didn't have much time to rest. They were attacked again, this time by mysterious forces that had followed their tracks. However, thanks to their combat experience, they managed to steal a ship and escape unseen. After a while, they realized that the ship had some kind of protection, shutting itself down after the crew members failed to identify themselves. Wounded and tired, the two fled in an escape pod, which landed precariously on a distant, unknown planet. This new world, cold and desolate, offered little in the way of shelter or resources. They were alone, with no means of communication and no guarantee that they would be rescued. With hopes of fixing the communication systems destroyed, Windu began to realize that they could be isolated on that planet for a long time. He couldn't help feeling that the Force had brought them there for a reason. Something bigger seemed to be afoot, something he couldn't ignore. Windu knew that fate often placed the Jedi in unexpected situations to test or teach them, and perhaps this was one of those moments. Reflecting on the situation, Windu began to consider that perhaps he had a personal mission with Anakin. Perhaps the Force was guiding him to pass on some crucial knowledge to the young Jedi. Windu knew that Anakin was in a moment of internal conflict, and he wondered if his own combat technique, the Vaapad, could be the answer. The Vaapad was a dangerous technique that channeled the darkness within without allowing it to corrupt him. However, if used incorrectly, it could easily be a catalyst for the dark side. With this idea in mind, Windu pondered the consequences. If he taught Anakin the Vaapad, he risked pushing him further towards the dark side, but at the same time, it could be the only way to help the young Jedi control his emotions and anger. The Vaapad was a powerful tool, but only for those who possessed absolute mastery over themselves. Windu knew that Anakin was at a crossroads, and the success or failure of this choice could define the fate of the galaxy. After days together and long talks with Anakin, Windu decided to take a chance. He saw an opportunity to reach the young Jedi's heart and guide him along a path that, although dangerous, could free him from his inner demons. Windu then offered to teach him the Vaapad. He explained that this technique would require Anakin to have absolute control over his anger and fears, something he knew would be difficult for the young man, but not impossible. On hearing Windu's proposal, Anakin saw a unique opportunity. He knew he was the chosen one, and this could be the key to unlocking the true potential he believed he was destined to achieve. Moreover, in his heart, he still carried the fear of losing Padme. In his quiet desperation, He hoped that if he learned to master the Vaapad, he might even find a way to save her. Determined to increase his power and perhaps change the course of his destiny, Anakin accepted Windu's offer. Little did he know that this decision would be a decisive step towards the uncertain future that awaited him. The training began with Mace Windu making clear to Anakin the dangers involved in the Vaapad. From the outset, Windu emphasized that this technique was not simply a combat style, but a way of channeling the darkest and most dangerous energies of the Force. He explained that the Vaapad tapped into the dark side, flirting with inner chaos and anger, and that in order to use it correctly, absolute self-control would be required. Any sign of emotional weakness or indecision could result in irreversible corruption, leading the practitioner straight to the dark side. Anakin, although confident in his abilities, began to understand the seriousness of the challenge as Windu detailed the risks. Vaapad, unlike other Jedi combat styles, required constant internal vigilance. The Dark Force would not only be a tool to be used, but a presence to be confronted and mastered. Windu emphasized that this technique, as powerful as it was, tested the practitioner's soul with every movement. One slip, one poorly controlled emotion, and the dark energy could overpower his will. Anakin had to be prepared to confront his greatest inner weaknesses. After explaining the dangers of the Vaapad, Mace Windu went on to focus on the importance of intense concentration in order to master the technique. He warned Anakin that in order to control the constant flow of dark force energy that the Vaapad manipulated, it was essential to maintain an absolutely focused mind. Any distraction, no matter how small, could be fatal. The practice of the Vaapad allowed for no mistakes, and concentration had to be not only physical, but also mental and emotional, as the technique demanded control over every thought and feeling. Windu taught Anakin that true mastery of the technique came not only in combat, but also in controlling his own mind. During training, he applied deep meditation exercises before each sparring session to ensure that Anakin was in a state of absolute focus. The idea was that, before each movement, before each blow, Anakin would have total clarity about his intentions and the flow of the Force around him. This would allow him to channel the Vaapad's energy without being consumed by it. To further hone his concentration, Windu challenged Anakin to train under extreme conditions, such as noisy environments or during stressful situations. The aim was to teach the young Jedi to block out all external distractions and focus only on combat and the flow of the Force. This mental training was just as challenging as the physical combat, and Anakin began to realize that without proper concentration, he wouldn't be able to sustain the Vaapad's power for long. His mind needed to be as sharp as his lightsaber skills. Over time, Anakin began to understand what Windu really meant about intense concentration. It wasn't just a question of being attentive, but of reaching a state of deep connection with the Force, where the mind became an extension of the body and vice versa. This allowed him to react instinctively, almost anticipating the movements of his opponents. However, Windu always warned him. Any deviation of focus, any selfish thought or uncontrolled anger, could turn this concentration into chaos, and the Vaapad, instead of being a tool of power, would become a fatal trap. After preparing Anakin mentally for the intensity of the Vaapad, Mace Windu finally moved on to the practical part of the combat. He explained that the technique was known for its aggressive and unpredictable movements, designed to destabilize and confuse the opponent. Vaapad was not a traditional fighting style, but a way of channeling the enemy's own aggression against him. The speed and precision of the blows forced the opponent to always be on the defensive, unable to predict the next attack, which left him vulnerable. Windu demonstrated the agile and fulminating movements that characterized the Vaapad, highlighting the fluidity between attack and defense. Each blow not only attacked physically, but also played on the opponent's emotions, taking advantage of moments of hesitation or fear. Anakin quickly realized that this style required more than lightsaber skills. He needed to let himself be carried away by the intensity of combat without losing control, a delicate balance that Windu insisted he master. Each movement was like an aggressive dance, where fury and strategy were mixed together. As the training progressed, Anakin began practicing the aggressive movements against simulated targets and in duels with Windu. The aim was always to put pressure on the opponent, keeping them in a constant state of tension, while Anakin maintained absolute focus. Windu explained that the Vaapad's power lay in its unpredictability. The opponent never knew where the next blow would come from, which undermined his confidence and compromised his ability to react. However, he also warned Anakin that this style required more caution, because the more aggressive the combat, the greater the risk of losing self-control. The aggressive moves, although powerful, also tested Anakin's limits. He felt the pressure to control his anger and frustration while using the Vaapad, and Windu was always vigilant to ensure that the young Jedi didn't cross the fine line between controlled aggression and unbridled fury. For Windu, the secret of the Vaapad was to use aggression as a tool, not as an end in itself. Combat had to be relentless, but the practitioner had to remain unperturbed, always one step ahead of his opponent, without allowing himself to be corrupted by the chaotic energy that the style evoked. Finally, Mace Windu came to the most delicate and dangerous aspect of the Vaapad, the redirection of the dark force. He explained to Anakin that this technique involved absorbing the negative energy that the opponent used, especially in attacks charged with hatred, anger, and fear, and turning it into a source of power for himself. It was a daring move as it involved tapping into the dark side of the Force, but instead of being consumed by it, the Vaapad practitioner redirected this energy into his own blows. The secret was not to let this negativity affect the Jedi's mind. Windu explained that this redirection was not a simple thing to do. It required a deep connection with the Force and impeccable emotional control. Anakin would have to open himself up to the dark emotions he felt in his opponent, allowing these vibrations to envelop him, but without absorbing them in a destructive way. By redirecting this energy, he would turn it into fuel to increase his own strength in combat. It was like using his opponent's anger against him, becoming even stronger without losing his balance. During training, Anakin began to experiment with this technique, facing simulations where his opponent used blows with a clear leaning towards the dark side. Windu patiently guided each movement, reminding Anakin to remain calm as he felt his opponent's fury all around him. By redirecting this energy, the young Jedi began to realize how negativity could be used to his advantage, becoming a catalyst for his own attacks. However, Windu constantly warned that the risk of being influenced by the dark force was always present. With each training session, Anakin showed progress, but he also faced internal challenges. The redirection of the dark force brought him into contact with the darkest emotions of his enemies, but also with his own. Windu was on the lookout for any sign that Anakin was leaning too far to the dark side, always reinforcing the importance of self-control. Redirection was a powerful technique, but also the most dangerous. To use it correctly, Anakin would need to master not only his movements, but his very soul, standing firm in the light while manipulating the darkness around him. In the final phase of his training, Windu began to notice worrying signs in Anakin. Despite all the progress he had made, something inside the young Jedi was beginning to destabilize. The traumas of the past, the memories of his mother, and, above all, the constant fear of losing Padme began to surface more intensely. These feelings undermined his ability to channel the dark force without being affected himself. Anakin began to show increasing irritability, and Windu, ever attentive, noticed that the emotional tension was interfering with the control he had been developing throughout his training. As Anakin allowed himself to be carried away by his emotions, the balance needed to redirect the dark force began to be lost. The fear of losing Padme, a deep and visceral fear, was consuming his mind, making it difficult to focus. The technique he had once seemed to master with a certain degree of control was now bringing him to the brink of emotional collapse. Windu understood that the problem lay not only in mastering the Vaapad, but in the internal conflicts Anakin was facing. Redirecting the dark force required a completely clear and focused mind, something that Anakin, at that moment, could not maintain. Seeing the imminent danger of letting Anakin advance unchecked, Windu decided to refocus on meditation and concentration. He knew that without a solid foundation of self-control, the use of the Vaapad could easily lead Anakin to the dark side. The combat sessions were temporarily suspended, and Windu began to guide him again in intensive meditation exercises. The aim was to calm Anakin's mind, re-establish inner peace, and allow him to face his fears rationally. But each time he touched on Anakin's fears, it became clearer to Windu that the young Jedi was fighting a much deeper internal battle than he had initially imagined. Even with Windu's efforts to restore Anakin's equilibrium, the young man's mind was becoming increasingly unstable. The thought of losing Padme was eating away at his thoughts and keeping him from the serenity he needed to channel the Force. During his meditations, Anakin would often lose focus, being carried away by dark images of future tragedies. The Force was showing him the danger ahead, but Anakin couldn't interpret it in a peaceful way. Windu, despite all his efforts, began to wonder if training on the Vaapad had been the right decision, fearing that by trying to strengthen Anakin, he had actually opened a door to his downfall. Then something surprising happened. After weeks of intensive concentration and meditation training, Anakin began to manifest a control that had previously seemed unattainable. He, who had initially been unable to channel the dark force without destabilizing himself, was now able to redirect it with frightening precision. Mace Windu watched intently as Anakin, in simulated combat, used the dark energy of the attacks against him, without showing any sign of emotional disturbance. The Force flowed through Anakin powerfully and, unlike before, he was no longer consumed by his emotions. On the contrary, he was using them to his advantage. But Anakin didn't stop there. As his training continued, his connection with the Force began to grow in an impressive way, almost beyond Windu's comprehension. The intensity with which Anakin now accessed the Force was beyond the expectations of any Jedi Master. It was as if something inside him had unlocked, releasing a power that had been repressed for years. Windu soon realized that the traumas and fears that had previously limited Anakin had become a kind of control valve. Mental training and meditation practices, which aimed to calm his mind, actually allowed him to overcome these barriers, unlocking all his latent potential. Windu, although initially cautious, couldn't help but recognize the sheer power that Anakin now manifested. He was an incredibly skilled Jedi, both in combat and in his connection with the Force. But what impressed Windu most was the calm Anakin displayed when controlling the energy of the Dark Force. The young Jedi seemed to have achieved a level of balance between light and dark that had rarely been seen before. This new stance not only made him more powerful, but also more aware of his emotions and the dangers he faced. The Vaapad, once a dangerous and uncontrollable technique for Anakin, was now just another tool in his vast arsenal of skills. It was at this moment that Windu finally understood the true meaning of Anakin being the Chosen One. It wasn't just his combat skills or his connection to the Force that made him special. Anakin had the rare ability to transcend the boundaries of light and dark, balancing between these forces in a way that no one else could. By overcoming his traumas and mastering the Vaapad, he had become more than just a great Jedi. He was the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, the Jedi who would bring balance to the Force. And Mace Windu, who had once distrusted the young man, now saw before him the Chosen One in all his glory. Mace Windu, observing Anakin's impressive progress, began to wonder when they would finally leave that inhospitable planet. The designs of the Force seemed to have been fulfilled. After all, Anakin had mastered the Vaapad and unlocked his true potential as the Chosen One. However, with no sign of rescue and his communications still disabled, the question remained. Was this the end of his journey there, or was there still more to be revealed? The silence of the night was beginning to fall over the planet, and Windu sensed that something important was yet to come. It was then, at dusk, that he noticed Anakin going into a deep meditation, something he had done before, but this time it seemed different. Windu woke up a few hours later and noticed that Anakin was still in meditation. However, something unusual had happened. The young Jedi was now levitating, floating gently a few centimeters off the ground. The presence of the Force around him was palpable, as if the entire planet was tuned into his energy. Hours passed, and Anakin remained motionless, in a state of deep connection with the Force. Worried that channeling the Dark Force might have some side effect, Windu tried to call him. He murmured Anakin's name, gradually increasing his tone, but there was no response. Suddenly, a strong wind began to blow around them. The wind brought with it a growing noise, and as Windu looked up at the sky, he saw a ship slowly descending close to where they were standing. Tension gripped Windu, and he braced himself for a possible attack, worried about protecting Anakin, who remained motionless, oblivious to everything around him. The ship landed softly on the ground and the doors opened. Windu advanced slowly, lightsaber in hand, ready for any confrontation. However, to his surprise, he saw two familiar figures emerging from the ship, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Yoda. Both seemed calm, almost as if they knew exactly what was going on. But the real surprise was yet to come. When Windu looked at the ship again, he saw something that completely stunned him. There was Anakin, stepping out of the ship alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda. But how was that possible? Windu immediately turned and looked back, where Anakin was still levitating, in deep meditation. Shock washed over him. Two Anakins? That didn't make sense. What was in front of him was an extraordinary manifestation of the Force. Anakin, or at least the figure that looked like him, approached Windu with a calm smile and, before Windu could say anything, the young man disappeared, as if he were a spirit of the Force. Windu, still processing what had just happened, looked again at the real Anakin, who was slowly opening his eyes. The young Jedi gently lowered himself to the ground and, getting up, walked towards Windu. With a serene countenance, he placed his hand on the Jedi Master's shoulder and said, with sincere gratitude, "Thank you, Master." Windu remained silent, but now understood what had happened. Anakin had unfolded, a rare ability that Luke Skywalker would use years later, but with one fundamental difference. Due to the channeling of the Dark Force, Anakin had worn himself out like Luke. To accomplish such a feat, he had reached a level of power that few could comprehend. As everyone boarded the ship, Windu still felt a mixture of confusion and fulfillment. The mission he had believed to be a mere opportunity to probe Anakin had turned into something much bigger. Now the Chosen One was ready. A sense of accomplishment washed over him as he sat down next to the other Jedi Masters. Yoda, always enigmatic, turned to Windu and, with his customary wisdom, said, "Yes, my friend." To master fear, learning the Vaapad was what the boy needed. Yoda's simple answer made it clear that all the training and challenges Anakin faced were part of a greater plan. With Anakin by his side, now stronger and more balanced, they set off back to the Republic. But this time, circumstances had changed. The Jedi Council not only had the most powerful young Jedi at their side, but also a secret weapon, the true Chosen One, capable of balancing the forces of light and dark. The future of the galaxy seemed uncertain, but one thing was certain. With Anakin Skywalker at their side, the Jedi Order now possessed an unparalleled asset.